Thank you, God, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Okay, I
Are you
will.
gonna do Aaron?
Sorry, Susan.
Are you going to do Aaron?
Am I going to do Aaron?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share. First of all, I want to I'll put in the chat the link to the doc so you have it later. Because as of every time I teach, we never get through all of the texts. But that way you'll have it for your perusal over Shabbat. Um, so here we go. As Susan mentioned, yes, we're starting by looking at it's not the beginning of this week's Torah portion, but it's about a quarter of the way through. The other big piece in this Torah portion is this is the first opportunity we learn about kashrut and the rules of keeping kosher. But we're not going to focus on that today, but that is another great and important section of this Torah portion. But this is the part that I want us to think about. Now Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before God alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from God and consumed them. Thus they died before God. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what God meant by saying, 'Through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent. Okay. So we have Aaron, who is the high priest, Moses' brother, his two sons, offer some kind of sacrifice in a way that is different from anyone else, alien, foreign fire of some kind. And as a result of this offering, God consumes them in fire and they are killed. And Moses then responds to his brother with this phrase, "Through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people." And Aaron's response is silence. So, first, I want to get a sense, what do people think? What is Moses saying to Aaron here? What does this phrase mean? He just lost his nephews. His brother just lost his two sons in this very tragic and probably awe-inspiring moment. And so, what is Moses saying? What's your interpretation of what Moses is saying to Aaron here? Before we get to Aaron's silence, curious what people think. Yeah, Ben.
Well, it's kind of like God walks softly but carries a big stick. I show myself in these small yet powerful, meaning ways, and then everybody's going to buy into it because it's so dramatic what I do. Does that make sense, Rabbi?
Okay, so Moses is saying, this is God's way of showing that through mighty acts we will kind of deepen our connection to God.
Right. That and believe in God's power and God's support of the people.
Yeah. Okay. Great. This is a way, Aaron, that we really recognize the power of God. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah, Cindy.
I have my person here to explain.
Oh,
Here, want to sit in my seat?
okay. We're taking a little break to hear. Hello.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me real quick. Cindy is best friends with my grandma.
What's your name? First, tell us what your name is.
I'm Gabe Whites.
Hi, Gabe.
Hi. Good. So I don't mean to interrupt your guys' beautiful Torah class right now, but I was coming to Cindy's because she was helping me do a mitzvah, actually, which is in the month of Nisan, which we're in now. And it's ending on whatever. It's coming up, I think on Mondays is the next month. So we are traditionally looking for blossoming trees in the month of Nisan because it is the sign of the next blooming fruit, and it's a prosperous omen to us. It's a prosperous a sign that the year is going to be fruitful, no pun intended. Or pun intended if you want. And so there's a special blessing that we say when we see two blossoming trees of fruit trees together. So the first time as the buds become flowers, we are enabled to say a certain blessing, which recognizes God's, providence in the world of putting forth, fruits and putting forth beautiful flowers. So I'll read you guys the blessing that I just said outside, which Kathy and my grandma, Cindy, I'm so sorry. With Cindy and my grandma said amen too. So I'll read it to you. But it says, hold on. I just had it up. Here we go. This is the blessing. It says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has made nothing lacking in his world and created it in goodly creatures and goodly trees to give mankind pleasure." So it's a really beautiful, once a year we say this. We don't say this blessing any other time. Maybe if you're having a glass of wine, if you're eating challah, we say that every week, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, or Borei pri hagafen. But this blessing on trees is said during the month of Nisan, and it is right after, during the Passover spring months, in order to recognize God's providence in the nature of the world and how he made it so beautiful for our eyes to behold. And it should engender gratitude in us that we live in such a colorful and wonderful world full of detail and full of meaningful plants and fruits that we enjoy and that give us pleasure. Because God could have created a world that was black and white and all we ate was tofu and rice. But he chose to give us unique, beautiful fruits and vegetables and trees to look at. So I hope that we can all take something from this, which is that nothing is meaningless, and every tree, even down to the blossoming fruit, should make us feel grateful for being in such a beautiful world.
Amen. Yeshkach.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys.
Dave,
I
do you
hope
want
I,
to?
I hope I hope I didn't take too much of your time.
No. Great. My other question to you: do you
Yes.
offer shehechianu alongside that bracha, or
You don't say the Shachianu with this bracha.
okay?
Only if you're eating a brand new fruit of the season that might have come from that tree before. But otherwise, yes. There
Nice.
you go.
Thanks for that teaching.
My pleasure. Okay. Thank you,
And
Cindy.
good Shabbos.
And good Shabbos, everybody. Take care. All the best.
Peter.
Happy
You
learning.
too.
Wonderful. Love that. Okay. It's always great to have guests and always great people who are passionate about our tradition. Okay. So we were in the midst of talking about I'll put it back up. What is Moses saying to Aaron here? So we have the idea of the mighty and powerful force of God. I feel like Rebecca had her hand up earlier. Rebecca, did you want to share something?
Well, I hate to say this, but perhaps God is selective towards those he wants near to him, but he will be known by all.
So explain in a little more detail.
So through those near me, I show myself holy. So he's saying that not everyone can be in my presence. There needs to be a certain quality or certain something, but I will show my presence to all people through glory.
Okay, great. And another great. Okay, good. Brad?
Well, I'm at a loss. I mean, here Aaron has just lost two of his sons. You'd expect some compassion maybe from his brother. I'm not hearing it in this language. And then Aaron's silence is even more confounding, having just lost two children. I don't get it.
Wow, we stumped Brad. That's pretty impressive. Okay, great. So we have the confounding nature of not only Moses's response in the aftermath of Aaron's son's death, but then of course Aaron's silence in response to Moses. Okay, so we're gonna get to that in a minute, Merle. And then
I'm just thinking Aaron's silence doesn't surprise me. When something happens that's, I guess the best word I can think of is an emergency or something totally beyond your thinking it's going to happen. What do you say? I mean, the silence doesn't shock me.
Okay, great.
I would be looking for some kind of compassion.
Okay, great.
But
There are certain situations that leave us speechless or silent, either because
yeah,
of the intensity of that moment, the setting, our emotional either stability or
wow.
instability, right? That all of these things play into the fact that it would make sense potentially that he is silent after all of this. Um,
Yes.
okay, Susan, I saw your hand.
Yes. So I agree in both respects with Merrill, and was it Brad who said that? I don't see.
Yeah, yeah, it was Brad.
Um, there seems little compassion to me in Moses, and it's like I'm thinking like the friends of Job, in the sense that the Adam and Abihu weren't really following God's uh, uh, directions and went on their own, which is also confounding. And Moses saying, "Well, look at I." They have to act in a holy way, and they have to go according to the correct method. And God will show compassion for that, and not what your son's done. So that did. So in that respect, it's like also a caveat for people who approach uh, the bereaved. What can you say? You can say something that comforts, and you could say something that doesn't comfort. So Moses could have remained silent too, or at least, said, "I'm sorry for your loss," or something like that. And I agree with Merle about Aaron's response. It was just too overwhelming, and what could he say? His sons were punished.
Right. Okay, good. So it's so great. I love all these interpretations. Let's start looking at some of the explanations and interpretations because there are a lot of ways to read this silence, right? Focusing more on the silence than on Moses's statement. But is Aaron silent in response to Moses, or is Aaron silent in response to the death of his sons? Both. Such a silence would simply be a symptom of a father's shattered and traumatized heart, grown instantly numb with grief. Aaron would simply be unable to speak. This interpretation is consistent with the Hebrew verb used here, vayidom, translated as, and he, Aaron, was silent. In its usage elsewhere in the Tanakh, that verb often implies a passive cessation of action or speech, a simple stopping. For example, the sun standing still for Joshua, the elders of Zion sitting silently on the ground in mourning, and the psalmist praising God without stopping. Interestingly, this is how the rabbis understand Aaron's silence, as a volitional recognition and acceptance of the judgment of God's decision, however painful. In fact, the Talmud even suggests that Aaron is rewarded for his silence in the implicit acceptance of God's will. Orchot Tzadikim amplifies this idea further, explaining that Aaron's response exemplifies the ideal response to any experience of God's strict justice, tziduk hadin, and adds that we should respond with silence when we hear others insulting us, rather than acting on our understandable impulse to respond in kind. Okay, so there are a few different pieces here. One, which was alluded to earlier, is this idea that silence is completely understandable after a father's shattered and traumatized heart, right, with grief, and that he was just unable to speak, right, and that the use of the Hebrew verb for he was silent, when you think about and compare it to these other references where that same verb is used, it seems as though it's really about just stopping, right? So he couldn't speak, right? There was just an inability to speak. And then the rabbis in our tradition, and we'll look at some more sources, this isn't the only one. This is a contemporary guy kind of responding to the tradition, that it's not only a stopping really because he is traumatized, but in fact, it's a complete acceptance of God's justice, that this was meant to happen, right? it's one of those phrases that I think I would never use with someone in mourning, but does exist out there. And sometimes we've heard it in the form of, well, they're in a better place, or, we don't understand the way the world works, but there's probably a reason why this happened. This seems to suggest this idea that, according to at least some parts of the Talmud, that silence is a form of acceptance that he doesn't understand. He may not understand, but God is acting through justice, and that this death is the response of God making a really valuable decision that we can't understand. And even further, and this is this part, so I'm curious what people think about that and your own feelings about that approach to death or loss. And also then this idea that we should respond with silence when we hear others insulting us, that we may have the impulse to respond, but that when we do have people attacking us, that the best response is silence. So there's a lot of pieces here. I'm curious thoughts, Brad.
You, Rabbi, I'm not really answering your question, but the point I want to make is this again reminds me of Eric Auerbach and his great book Mimesis, where he compares Homer to the Akeda episode, and he says what's different is in the works of Homer, you know exactly what the people are thinking, and here we have no idea really what Aaron is thinking. None. I mean, we can project onto Aaron all kinds of different things, but the Torah is not a psychological novel. And that's why it is at the same time frustrating and why we keep coming back to it because we just don't know. We just don't know.
What do you mean by it's not a psychological novel? Because if that would be the case, then why would we spend time on trying to understand any of the characters' actions or any of their motivations?
Well, I mean, if you think of the great novels of the 19th century, the great psychological novels, Balzac, Proust, whatever, I mean, you know exactly what these people are thinking. And here you don't. We really are not told explicitly what Aaron is thinking. We have to write the novel ourselves as
Yes,
we read it.
yes,
And in that sense, it's very much like a 20th century new novel where the reader so much is in so much so much responsibility is placed upon the reader to interpret rather than to have the text interpret for us.
yes, right. And which is, of course, the brilliance of the Torah in many ways, in my opinion, right? That leaves so much of that space for all the different interpretations of what that silence may be about. Yeah, great. Thank you, Brad. Merle.
I'm thinking of before you mentioned it, I'm thinking of the insulting part and how we respond. My parents always taught me you don't yell and scream back, you just, ignore it and move on because what's it going to do for you to respond nastily? And when somebody's insulting me now or years ago, which happens, I've always just walked away. I don't know that that's the smartest thing to do, or maybe it's an insult to those who insulted you that you're not responding.
Yeah, other people either feel similarly or different from Merle in terms of either how they were raised or how they feel we ought to respond to those who insult us.
That's okay.
It's okay. Well, we're talking about silence, so there's a little silence yet. That's okay.
Well, I was always taught that one cannot argue with the insane because they'll always out crazy you. So if somebody's insulting and they're crazy, you can never kind of win because they can always go
Yeah,
nuttier.
I like that. All right, let's keep going. Uh, this is from the Talmud. The Holy One, blessed be he, said this statement to Moses, but Moses did not know its meaning until the sons of Aaron died. Once the sons of Aaron died, Moses said to him, Aaron, my brother, your sons died only to sanctify the name of the Holy One, blessed be he. When Aaron knew that his sons were beloved by the Omnipresent, he was silent and received a reward, as it is stated, and Aaron held his peace. Right? Slightly different, translation, but the idea of and he was silent. Right? So here, this is the implication here, is that Aaron gets to the point when Moses tells him that basically his sons were special, and that they died because they were special. Then Aaron has a sense of relief and is at peace, knowing that his sons were loved by God, and that's why he's silent, right? I don't know if this necessarily aligns with many of our modern understandings of both theology and how we would connect with someone who's just lost someone, but it is part of our tradition. So yeah, Cindy and then Rebecca.
Yeah, my understanding was that they died because they deviated from the rules, that it was a punishment, not because they were special.
Well, again, like all the wonderful things in Torah, many different interpretations, right? Yes, the way the story is set up, by this idea that they offered alien fire,
Yeah.
you would assume that they did something wrong, right? And yet, both in this passage and now we have here in this Talmudic passage, there is a sense that actually there was something special about them. Now, maybe this is a teaching about Nadav and Abihu, that their power, that they went too far, maybe, but there was something important about going outside the norm. That their intention, even if they did something wrong, their intentionality was such that that they deserve to be rewarded. Again, it's kind of an interesting move because they did die, and that's usually not a reward in our tradition. Death is not seen as a reward. So here it seems like the rabbis are trying to make a move to help soften the blow. Rebecca and then Sydney.
I personally like this because it helps make sense of what I was trying to say earlier about, I don't know, being selective. If the sons were chosen to help sanctify the name of the Holy One, then that was a selection, and that makes more sense to me now. Thank you so much for putting that up.
Yeah. Yeah. In many ways, this is a very comforting approach, um, to believe and to feel as though the death of the people we care about, is due to a special relationship that exists between God and the person who died. That seems to be implied here. Sydney and then Susan.
Rabbi, this sounds to me a lot like the point you were making earlier, that when people pass away, sometimes people say, well, he or she is now with God, or that person must have been so good that God wanted him or her with them. So it's about faith, and in effect, the way I read this is a justification for the dissembling from real grief. This is the way we justify the pain. And so we can justify it by saying God really wanted them. They were so special, that God wanted them. And therefore, maybe the silence of Aaron we can read that as acceptance. So, I don't read it that way. I don't read it that way because, as you point out, we're reading it, in this century with a psychological perspective, maybe. But are we, in fact, supposed to just accept whatever it is that we are told is a justification for the removal, the death of our loved ones or something like that? So that's how
Yeah.
I'm reading it.
Yes. Thank you. And it's a great question, obviously, with no easy answer. But yes, this seems to be a justification in many ways. Thank you. Susan.
Mhm.
I hear that perspective and I agree with it, but I think it could also be, it is both. I think, and that's what some of the beauty, it's not an either or. It is this and that, because one can look at, I was in went to some bereavement groups for a while. And some of the things that were said to the parents, some people said, I loved it when someone said this. And another person said, you know, I really disliked that, what it was saying. And I found that for a number of comments that people received from other people. And one thing that was comforting is that one person said, you know, it's said in the Talmud or something that when a good person dies young, they become advocates for their family in heaven. Now, who knows if that's true? But it was, but at a time of extreme grief, it's helpful to hear some of these more positive things. And what are you going to do when someone dies? You know, you're going to just, what is there to do? You have to accept it because that person is dead, you know? So it can only be your thoughts and perhaps your actions in that person's memory that can assuage the grief or at least modify it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Penina.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I think that there is a longer or farther picture to look at when beside that moment of silence. I think we are in a process. They were all in a process of yet trying to believe in that one God that promised them also to be in a land where they can be free. So there is two things here that are happening. One of them is the transformation of believing in the unseen God, that it's actually has here a moment of purpose when he took Moses out of Egypt with the people. It's to take him out of slavery and also to take him away from believing in many gods and many idols. And the prize that he promised Abraham for the whole idea of this one unseen God is that Lecha natati et haaretz hazot, I will give you that land. That was supposed to be the prize for believing in that one unseen God. And here Aaron is going back to, and his two sons, maybe he wasn't really promoting it, but it was a participation because his son was following his examples and his suggestions. And the sons are going back to the same practice that was done when they were worshiping idols. So the idea is that that's why there was two things here. Aaron was supposed to be in charge of the spiritual part of it. Moses was in charge of the actual act of taking them out of slaves, teaching them how to think for themselves, realizing that the idols are not God, that God's promise is to bring them to that land where they can literally start a new history, the believing in unseen God who is going to be in charge of everything that's happening there. So it was a process, like every other thing that takes time to acquire or understand. So now Moses says to him, I have this one agenda. I have to get them to that place, and they have to believe in this God that they cannot see or they cannot literally hear, only through what's happening in nature. And Aaron was still seesawing because his sons were still bringing fire like it was done before to the idols. That's why he kept quiet, because he actually was supposed to participate in the same agenda as Moses. That's why he went with him in front of Pharaoh. And here, by letting his sons doing something that was done before that to the idols, he's taking everybody back.
Okay, so Penina's reading is that this is
And that's why the trees, I'm not done, please. That's why the trees flowering at that time are also very important. The trees are not supposed to be anywhere. Again, it's them changing from slaves, from people who believe in idol, into people who walk the land, get settled in it, and appreciate whatever it is that flowers as a result of their labor. And
All right.
as a result of what they contribute to this place that was with no water, nothing was happening there, till
Got
they
it.
get there and turn it into a country and a land that can sustain their people.
Okay. Thank you. I want to give other people a chance.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Brad.
Okay. I'm back to projecting what I see in this passage. And the way I can relate personally is that when I've been confronted with somebody who's had a loss, I'm invariably at a loss for words myself. And I feel like I frequently say the wrong thing. And therefore, it's not at all surprising that the mourner is silent because they don't know how to respond to the to what I've said, because there's really no words that really can communicate correctly, uh, to the mourner your compassion for them.
Yeah, great. So that brings me to this passage right here. Well, these really briefly, the Ramban says this means that he had cried aloud, but then he became silent, right? So that first he actually did cry. And then Rabbeinu Bachya says silence is one of the ways in which mourning is expressed. Okay, so we're kind of getting to that. And then it is customary throughout the world and in many cultures to remember those who are no longer with us with a moment of silence. Silence in Jewish law is associated with mourning as well. The Shulchan Aruch, which is a law code, writes that those who come to comfort a mourner should not speak to the mourner until the mourner first speaks to him. The reason for the silence, the Shulchan Aruch writes, is that our comfort of the mourner is to aid him in understanding the passing of his loved one was an act of God and a just action. Okay, now whether or not you agree with this last piece, that that is the goal of trying to aid someone and comforting them in a time of loss. This idea of the best practice of going to the home of a mourner and instead of trying to figure out how to fill the silence, that actually to leave that silence open, and that the mourner is the one who is supposed to guide the conversation or no conversation, right? And I think this is one of those things that our tradition a long time ago is trying to remind us that there are times where silence is really valuable and powerful, and we don't necessarily always have to fill it. And that in certain situations, it's not our responsibility to fill that silence, and instead that our silence is actually a form of comfort and respect for the person going through a challenging time, right? So I think sometimes we may struggle to try and figure out what's the right thing to say. And I think one of the wonderful lessons of this, and of at least what I've found in my time in my work, is sometimes that silence is really the best thing to do, and to just sit in that silence. We don't sit in silence enough, but actually there is power in sitting in that silence, whether it's comforting, whether it's an opportunity for self-reflection, right? And so again, the passage up here doesn't necessarily tell us what his motivation was, but already Moses seems to break the first rule, at least the rule from the Shulchan Aruch, which is, let's just sit in that silence. Now we find that I'm going to skip this one. There's yet another way to understand Aaron's silence. Instead of an act of incredible self-awareness, restraint, and public piety, of avoidance of the responsibility to speak out against injustice, or of a lack of fatherly feelings, Aaron's shticha, with his silence, might have been a practice of mindfulness and an attempt at communion with God in the face of tragedy. Perhaps Aaron needs silence and stillness because he is desperate to find some way to reconnect with his own soul, with those around him, and even with God. Aaron takes refuge in his silence because it is the only spiritual tool with which he can meet the terrible anguish of his grief, the only way to honor the pain he feels for himself and his family. And I think this is a good reminder that sometimes when we come across someone who is really dealing with some painful experiences or loss or whatever it may be going on in their life, uh, that their silence may not be an attempt for them to close themselves off from other people, but actually is an attempt to reconnect with themselves, and for us to keep that in mind. I'm curious if anyone relates to this passage by Rabbi Jonathan Krauss, if anyone has used this as a strategy themselves, um, or 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 any reflections or responses to this type of silence that's being referred to. Okay. To me, this idea of mindfulness, which has taken off in um, popular culture these days, it's just always nice to be reminded of we are the source of so many wonderful things, and that mindfulness has been a part of our tradition for thousands of years, right? Many of the things that get repackaged in modern society are things that we as a Jewish people have been thinking about and practicing for a long time, right? So this idea of mindfulness, of intentionality, of really trying to reconnect with ourselves, that we don't spend enough time in this type of silence. And it doesn't always have to be, of course, in response to tragedy, but how important it is for us to reconnect with our own soul, with those around us, and with God. And sometimes that happens through connection and conversation, and sometimes it just takes silence and for us to live in that silence for a little bit. Susan.
So I want to thank you for bringing all these different interpretations to us. I mean, I find it really helpful, and I found some connection with all of them. So this mindfulness is, when you're out in nature and you commune with God, that can be part of it here too. So I'm really impressed with all of these interpretations. But we're also part of a culture that does talk about feelings. At least I was raised with two psychologist parents. So in some respects, and there are grief counselors too, that somehow you can express your grief. You can have both. You can have expressions of grief to get it out of your system, to question, and then have moments of communion. And then one way to help with that is to have some affirmative, some action that you do that is in the spirit of the loved ones, the departed loved ones. And we see that, I mean, Aaron has that as a given, but we don't know if any of that is in the memory of the son. But I like all of these various views. I think they're wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Rebecca.
I have something contrary to say. When my father died, it was suggested, I was living in Santa Cruz at the time, and the hospice organization here in Los Angeles suggested that I contact the hospice organization in Santa Cruz, which I did. And when I went there, I mean, I was sobbing, snot coming out of my nose. It was horrible, horrible feeling that I had. And the hospice person just sat there in silence. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
It was not comforting at all.
Yeah, and that's equally valid, right? And again, the reason I think there are so many of these interpretations, as Susan alluded to, is because there's so many different ways to both respond to tragedy and grief and also so many ways to understand silence. Sometimes it's very powerful and comforting, and sometimes it's unnerving. And that both depends on us as individuals, how we understand the world, how we relate to the world, and also the situation, right? So you not only contrary, it's totally relevant, and we all respond differently, right? Merle.
I think that a lot of how we respond or how anybody responds to what we're going through or someone is going through has to do with your relationship with those people. I mean, I was lucky. I had Wilshire Boulevard Temple. I had our temple here when both my mother passed away and when my brother-in-law passed away. There were different people who responded differently, who understood their death or didn't want to understand why I reacted or Arnie reacted the way we did. And I think a lot of it is about relationships
Hmm.
and how people react to you or the person you're mourning.
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, yeah, yes, absolutely. Okay, let's look. I want to, maybe I didn't include that part. Okay, sorry, I'm just kind of going through. I don't remember which. Fine. Well, so there continues to be more. Oh, go ahead, Brad, before we go to this.
You know, Rabbi, I'm just thinking of monks who take a vow of silence. I imagine there's nothing like that in the Jewish tradition. And I'm wondering what the thinking behind that is. Is it because words can hurt? Is it because conversation distracts us from communing with God? I mean, maybe that's one of the explanations of what's going on here is that conversation, you know, again, maybe that's in your last observation about silence. Conversation gets in the way of us communing with God.
Yeah, I think again it's de dependent, but yes, there are times where
What's the origin of that tradition? Do you have any idea?
of the monks taking a vow of silence.
Yeah.
No, I do not. It's a great question. I do
Mm,
not know.
mm.
We'll look into that though. But it's very not Jewish. That's for sure, right? We do believe in the power of silence, but you can't change yourself or the world in silence, right? And in some ways, while we do separate words and speech from action, I think in our tradition, action and speech and language are very much connected to one another. And since we are such an action-based religion, even to
Mm.
the point where we had that guest at Cindy's house, talking, offering that blessing over the blossoms. Um, the action of offering a blessing, it's words, but it's really much deeper than that, as he beautifully explained his understanding and interpretation of why we offer that blessing, right? That is an action-based, is how we are supposed to then engage in the world. Um, is is a reason for using those words. So yeah, we very much rely on words and speech, and yet we also, I think, really recognize, as we do in these two passages, the value of silence, and that there is wisdom in silence. Not you, if you're only speaking, if you're always speaking, you're missing a key piece of what silence can offer, right? This is the famous line here. But there are times,
Thanks.
yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Hey, I just wanted to thank Benjamin for his comment in the notes in the chat.
Ah, yes.
And I put a chat in myself, and that our Steve, always used to say, if you don't know what to do, just show up. And your presence is sometimes just enough. And if you're talking about, this is such a broad subject, I hate even to get into it, because are we speaking of the imminence of a death? Are we speaking of the continuum? It doesn't leave, because the actual silence comes up when everybody's gone. And that's when it's the hardest part, is facing yourself. It is not all the other people. It is not all the things. It is not the physical. It is that real facing your relationship and the death of the person. And then you have to live through this by parsing, truly the relationship, your love, your what you've gone through, what you've embraced, how long this relationship has endured, or whatever. It's so big that we couldn't answer it in this. Not that I don't appreciate everybody and Rabbi giving us the explanation of Torah portion, but I have to go further and broaden all this for the way we live today and whatever. And we can't compare it to the person next to us. One person experiences it one way, another person experiences it another way. And I think just to be there and if it is silence, that's wonderful, but it is also the perpetuation of showing up for a friend or a loved one or whatever, and not engaging constantly. And because all you're doing is taking away the presence of that one that just died when you're speaking. So at any rate, please.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I think there's a reason why most of the spiritual experiences that exist in the Torah take place in the wilderness. Usually when characters are by themselves in the wilderness, right? The wilderness is that place that is symbolically a place of silence in many ways, right? It's a lacking of direction. You can very easily be lost in that wilderness, right? And the majority of our Torah is in the wilderness. And yet it's in that place where we do connect with something bigger, or where we can connect with ourselves, right? And so silence is almost is a version of that wilderness, and the individual's ability to have the strength to sit in that silence, in that spiritual silence, and in that wilderness is a really key piece of our tradition. And it's also extremely difficult, right? What I love is our tradition recognizes that none of this is easy, and to your point, Karen, that there are so many different ways of understanding the role and value of silence, and that everyone takes it differently, right? We're about to be out of time, so you'll have to read through the rest on your own, but I do want to point out there are also times where our tradition says silence is not valuable, or you should not be silent. This is the famous story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Where Abraham speaks out to God and starts to question God. And at a time where Abraham, like Noah before him, could have stayed silent and instead doesn't. And so this is a prime example of when silence is actually not the answer in times of potential injustice, or in times where we have a responsibility to even be in conversation with God and to speak up. Then we have again later on, later in Exodus, when we're already wandering through the desert, and of course the Israelites are kvetching left and right, and God gets to the point where he says, I'm fed up with these Jews. Enough of them already. I'm just going to get rid of them and destroy them, and you'll be the only one, Moses. And Moses, of course, not silent, but speaks up to God and uses this fascinating psychological, approach to play on God's ego almost, and so speaks up in a really powerful and important way. So there's a lot there as well. We have Job. So we don't have time to get into all of these, but there are these examples. For example, anyone who had the capability to effectively, this is from the Talmud, who had the capability to effectively protest the sinful conduct of the members of his household and did not protest, he himself is apprehended for the sins of the members of his household and punished. If he is in a position to protest the sinful conduct of the people of his town and he fails to do so, he is apprehended for the sins of the people of his town. If he is in a position to protest the sinful conduct of the whole world and he fails to do so, He is apprehended for the sins of the whole world. Very different from silence. This is a clear statement. And again, the reason I bring this is because I think this is something we struggle with in today's world, with the situation both in our country and in Israel, and the divisiveness that exists. This would seem to indicate a very different type of approach we must take to the world than the need for silence, right? And again, I don't think our tradition is laying out an easy, this is when you do this and this is when you do that. The reason I bring all of these is because I think, again, the brilliance of our tradition is saying we have to weigh personally where we want to be silent, when we need that silence, and when we have a responsibility to speak up. And this is a time where I think we all are thinking about that, and it's sometimes nice to have some guidelines from our tradition, which don't necessarily give us an easy answer, but do offer us some guideposts to help us when we do make that decision to maybe be able to articulate why and to ground it in our Jewish values. Susan, you have your hand up. Last word before we close out.
So I think you're absolutely right. In fact, our tradition has less silence from I know from the Jewish people, and they're always asking questions. And that part of the things are questions. I think what most of the discussion was with grief and death, and that's is a difficult situation. It's less injustice in the world or things going wrong. We're supposed to speak up. We do. I think there's more in our tradition about that and questioning, but this is a real, the death issue in silence, I think, is very poignant and pinpointed discussion. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you all for your insights. Wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And have a peaceful one. And hopefully you find some moments of silence and reflection. May we all find our voice when it's appropriate and necessary.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
I did.